Hi, everyone, and welcome to Scholars Hub at Home. I am Julie Lafford, and I'm the Executive Director for Alumni Engagement here at York University. Before we start, I just want to note that we have been having a few technical difficulties in the background, so please forgive us if I do freeze and bear with us as we work through these. Thanks for joining us today for our lecture, The Blockchain Story in 2022, Cryptos, NFTs, Web3, and More, with Henry Kim, Associate Professor in the Schulich School of Business and Director of the Blockchain.lab. I accept the responsibility to acknowledge the land I'm on, and because we're not all gathered in the same place, the land I'm about to acknowledge might not be for the territory that you are currently on. So please take the time to acknowledge the traditional territory you find yourself on, and if you need a resource for that, the website native-land.ca is a great one. As a member of the York University community, I recognize that many Indigenous nations have longstanding relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located, and these precede the establishment of the university. York University acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. This area, known as Takaronto, has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. Before we begin today's lecture, we'd like to do a quick poll. And our question today is, how would you rate your knowledge regarding the topic of today's presentation? So the poll should pop up on your screen right now, and I'll give you all a moment to respond. Thank you. It's helpful for our speakers to know more about who's in the audience and what you're bringing to today's lecture. If you need help with the Zoom webinar, feel free to click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and enter your question. Our team's ready to help you. That same button may be used to submit questions for our guest speaker to answer during the Q&A period following today's presentation. Please note that all your questions and comments are visible to our staff and panelists working behind the scenes, and we ask that you keep your comments relevant and respectful. Now I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Henry Kim. Having published more than 30 academic articles on blockchain topics, he is a leading academic in this area in Canada. He has also been a part of several blockchain startups. He's a highly sought after for his expertise and has made numerous print, TV, and radio appearances. We're so pleased you could take the time to join us today. Welcome, Professor Kim. You can turn.
Thank you very much.
Great.
Thank you. All right, thank you.
So I'll leave it with you to share your screen and take it away, and I'll meet you back here after the presentation.
Good. Thank you, Julie. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you very much. All right, folks, let me just project here. Okay. While this is coming up, I noticed that the majority of the people felt that they had minimal knowledge of this technology. So that is the presentation that I prepared, I have about 25 minutes part of that, but we've left a lot of, there's always a lot of questions. So we've left a lot of time for these questions. Okay, so I started this journey, this blockchain journey in 2016 when I, together with my postdoc at the time, Merrick Laskowski, started the lab because we'd heard a lot of rumblings, and as it turns out, Toronto was a great place for the blockchain ecosystem. One of the most important people in the blockchain space is a young man named Vitalik Buterin, who's only about 25 or 26, and probably on paper worth about $500 million. But he actually was the founder of the second largest blockchain, which is called Ethereum, and he's from Toronto. He dropped out of University of Waterloo. So there's a lot of knowledge and expertise in blockchain, and we just tapped into it at the beginning of 2016. And from that journey, we've come to a point where we've worked with all these different organizations, including the United Nations, Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Affairs in Ontario, the NIST in the United States, as well as we're just initiating a study with the Bank of Canada. I, together with a bunch of several colleagues who are also interested in blockchain technologies and finance that's enabled by blockchain, have come together and have a $500,000 research project funded by York University Research and Innovation on investigating different applications of blockchain technologies, particularly towards finance and use of digital currencies and cryptocurrencies and what are called these things called central bank digital currencies. And as part of that, we're working with the Bank of Canada and many other financial institutions and other institutions in Toronto and abroad. Anyway, so that's the context of me, and that's sort of the expertise. And I've been doing this for 6 years, doing a lot of research, so I feel like pretty confident mostly. But this space is so quick that there are a lot of things I don't know about because, again, it's such an innovative space, and hopefully I'll get into that in discussions today. So, because even though I have a lot of expertise in the blockchain technology, and even though I got into this space, not necessarily because I was interested in Bitcoin, but because I was interested in the underlying technology, what I'll speak about. Most of the time, sorry, I don't know what that's happening there. Most of the time, when people come and like I've been on CBC several times, when people want me to speak, as today, what they're really interested in is cryptocurrencies and very specifically Bitcoin, right? So I'd be remiss if I didn't go into what you're probably all thinking about, which is, what do I do with, should I buy Bitcoins and what is it and so forth? So I want to get into that first because even, and do that first and talk about blockchain technologies next. So the question that all people are always asking me is, should you invest in Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies and NFTs and digital asset companies? We'll get to what they are later on. But I think the one thing that you could start off with is this way, that there are these things called cryptocurrencies, and they are traded in the open market. So you can actually trade them. And if the more they're traded, the value of things like Bitcoins can go up in price. And therefore, if you buy low, sell high, you can make money. So it really is something that people use for investments and something that people use for speculation. Now, unlike stocks, which have are traded in stock exchanges, Bitcoin really is not. There's a whole different way of trading it, which I can't get into in 20 minutes time. But if you are interested, just know that there are ETFs in Canada, exchange traded funds, that you can actually go long or buy Bitcoins or even short Bitcoins. Anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there. But really, the thing I want to get to is that it's and when the radio hosts ask me questions, or when people come and ask me about that, this thing is just so complicated, people don't quite understand it. So what I at least want to do for the first part is, if you're on this seminar because you're interested in whether you should buy Bitcoins or not, and that's one of the key interests that you have, I'm going to sort of allay that first and talk about the blockchain technologies next. All right, so you could get yourself tied in knots because it's really complicated, and it's very complicated even for me to keep up because there's so much going on. There's so much human capital put into this. Okay, so one of the things I want to get to is, let's start with, so I've told you that Bitcoin can be an investment. It could be something you could speculate with. All right, I want to show you 3 charts of investments. Okay, this first one went up 684%. From March 2020 to January 21. This one went up, sorry, I'm gonna stop this here. I don't know why that's actually happening. Shoot. Sorry about that, folks. So bear with me on this one. So anyway, what I wanna show you is that there are these 3 investments that have gone up in price like this. The first one here went straight back down, and it's actually, by May of 2021, the price of this thing was actually below what it was in March. The second one here went up 814%, and the price went down quite a bit, but not as much as when it started. And this one is a nice, steady climb. Okay. This is the stock price of Peloton. You know, when during the pandemic, everyone bought their Pelotons, but people don't use it much anymore. The middle one here is the price of Bitcoin, and the third one here is the price of Apple. Right? And what I said, this is important, and this is why the slide is called story versus value. The first one I would say of Peloton stock, it's a broken story. It's not really much it's a broken stock. That's the expression is, not much to invest with that. The second one here is what I call a strange story. And the third one is steady value. These two, I don't know, you go, is this really value in this? The third one, Apple, we know that there's value in the Apple product. We know that there's value in the Apple stock. Right? And what I want to talk about is this difference between broken, Apple 995 was almost a stock that actually was almost just worth $2. It was a broken story. And then Steve Jobs came back to Apple around 1996, 2004, and it was still a story. Basically, if you're an investor, you invest in Apple partly because you thought Steve Jobs was this brilliant person. As it turned out, he really executed on the iPhone. And right now in 2022, you would say it's the world's most valuable company. It's a story. It's definitely has value, the stock itself and the products. Right? The thing I would say, again, go back to before Apple achieved its value status in 2022, it was a story that you bought Apple stock because you believed in the story of Stephen Jobs. The reason to buy Bitcoins right now is that you believe the story of Bitcoin as digital gold. And that's what I actually always tell people, is that there are a lot of aspects of Bitcoin that's like gold. You buy it for a rainy day. It's supposedly a store of value. In the olden days when you had people who feared the apocalypse, they would build their bunkers and they would put canned goods and they'd have gold. Now the truth is actually they have their canned goods, they have their bunkers, but now they actually have Bitcoin. So there's a lot of reasons for. So if you are interested in gold, buy gold, then you might be interested in buying Bitcoins. There are other cryptocurrencies like Ethereum, Solana, there's a handful of others. And what I always tell people is that you're still buying a story. The story is that these blockchains will be really widely used in the future, and therefore you're buying it cheap now for the story that it's going to be widely used. And so it's a very speculative investment. So some people are comfortable with taking risk, and they'll buy, for instance, high risk tech stocks or biotech stocks. And I tell people that this is how you should treat it. In fact, I've been called in a couple of investment boards and asked to give my opinion on their investments, and this is exactly what I tell them. And there's also there are things like some very speculative NFTs, sort of other types of coins that I would say are kind of on the broken side, that you can still maybe trade them and make money off of them, but just realize that you're in the deep end and you're really selling, buying or selling cryptocurrency based upon a broken story, as if just like, if you're buying and selling Peloton stock, you're doing it off of a broken story. And then lastly, there are what I would characterize as poop coins. It's probably, that's not exactly the term people use, but basically they are Ponzi schemes, sort of half-baked ideas, because it's actually quite easy to make a cryptocurrency. People speculate there might even be hundreds of thousands of cryptocurrencies out there, 99% of which are dog poop. They just, again, people do trade them, I don't, but just recognize they're completely, they're just completely these Ponzi schemes that people get in and out. So the vast majority, if not all of you, I'd say stay away from these. Things like, if you've heard in the news, Dogecoin is one, but many, many others, they're just basically sort of in this category. So what I've just sort of characterized for you is 4 different types of crypto investments. And really for you, I would say the only two you would consider are Bitcoin and maybe a half a dozen or a dozen of these different cryptocurrencies that you think that actually might have value. The rest, I just wouldn't touch. Even if you have a son or a cousin that tells you to touch them, I would not touch them. Um, Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is often tossed around by people as a potential medium of exchange. Okay, so a medium exchange can be used to intermediate the exchange of goods and services. So in economics literature, people have said money serves these three purposes. One of them is a medium of exchange. For example, a community may use pelts as a medium to trade for other goods. So a lot of people have said, hey, can you use Bitcoin as a medium of exchange? The problem with Bitcoin is that it's, again, for those of you that might have seen this on the news, its prices go up and down, and lately it's been going down a lot. Therefore, it's not, you don't want to pay for something. You don't want to pay $1 for something, all of a sudden to find out that it's worth 50 cents. What used to be $1 is worth 50 cents now. So you want like money to be like our dollar, which is relatively stable. So as a medium of exchange, Bitcoin is not a great medium of exchange, at least in places like Canada and the United States. A second use of money, and for a lot of Bitcoin enthusiasts, they would say Bitcoin could be used as a unit of account. A unit of account is a standard measure of market value for goods and services. So for example, housing prices in Japan can be compared using the yen as a unit of account. However, having said that, there actually are better units of account. There's something called central bank digital currencies, which is going to be like a digital, the Bank of Canada is working on it, the US Fed is working on it, but they're basically digital currencies, like a digital loonie that actually has, that you can send, and you can send and put in a wallet, similar to how we, how especially in places like China, they use WeChat Pay and Alipay. And there's also some other cryptocurrencies that are called stable coins. Anyway, these are actually quite stable. They're pegged to US dollar or Canadian dollar. Therefore, they're a much better unit of account. So the argument that Bitcoin is a unit of account doesn't also hold either. Finally, the argument of Bitcoin is that a store of value. A store of value can be spent or exchanged at a later date without penalty. For example, an ounce of gold could buy a toga in Roman times, yet it can still buy a nice suit today. Okay, so therefore, gold is ostensibly a store of value. Okay? And so one of the things that gold, and a lot of people have said about things like gold and Bitcoin, is that it's a good store of value. So that as the dollar loses value because of inflation, and this is the US Consumer Price Index, of course, we're also experiencing it just the same in Canada, where something is just, a dollar doesn't buy nearly as much as it did a year ago. So we're in a place of inflation. So something that is a store of value, like gold, ought to do well in times of inflation. And we've had the most inflation now that we've had in 40 years. Having said that, this is the performance of QQQ, which is a US ETF for the technology stocks in the United States. That's gone down in the same period that we've had this rampant inflation in the past year. QQQ, the stock has gone down 6%, at least of May. It's gone down actually a little bit more. Bitcoin and gold has gone down actually. It's done a little bit better, so it's kept its value a little bit, but it's gone down 1%. Bitcoin has gone down 40%. So the argument that Bitcoin is a store of value also doesn't hold, because it's actually lost way more because of inflation than, say, the US dollar. So what I tell people, and I was talking to an MP about this, I say that Bitcoin is not a store of value, it's a story of value. So recall what I told you to differentiate between a story and value. Apple is a value stock. Right now, Bitcoin is still just a story. It's a story that it could be like digital money, and it's a story that it could be like digital gold. So really, currently, Bitcoin is a story of value. It's not a store of value. Story that it will take part of gold's market cap may be enough for Bitcoin to hit 100,000 in the next few years. From actually, it's around $20,000 now. After that, I don't know. I use this graphic for America Online because what I want to sort of point out is that we're obsessed, and in fact, I'm kind of running out of time here. So right now, everyone is obsessed with Bitcoin, and everyone, when they hear blockchain, when they hear cryptocurrencies, they think about Bitcoin. I'm of the opinion that this blockchain technology, which I'll talk a little bit more about, will actually supersede and become much more important, become much more widespread, hopefully, around the world. And so maybe 15, 20 years down the road, we'll think about Bitcoin as an afterthought. That is, we'll think about Bitcoin as something that introduced the world to blockchain technologies and its capabilities, but in 20 years from time won't be as relevant. America Online, or AOL, introduced the world to the internet, and it was the company that everyone thought about when they thought about the internet in 1995. No one really thinks about AOL right now. So I'm thinking that maybe Bitcoin might be like that. Cryptocurrencies representing infrastructure blockchains like Ethereum and maybe 24 others do have promise. Tiny portion of NFTs may retain value or even appreciate. Greater than 99% of all cryptocurrencies and NFTs will eventually be worthless. Just know that. So there's a lot of money to be made in speculation. This also means that there's a lot of money to be lost. Now, I realize this is, we didn't get into blockchain technologies very much, but what I wanted to get to is that when people come talk to me about blockchain, they're really interested in this thing, which is an investment of it. So I'd be remiss if I didn't do my public service announcement and sort of tell you, this context about Bitcoin, and just to tell you, be really, 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 really careful and recognize that everything is a story, and stories aren't proven investments. Stories are potentially amazing speculation pieces. Oh boy, I'm really running out of time here. But what's been said about blockchain is that while blockchain technology is relatively, let me, because I did actually really, really want to get to your question. So let me skip to the couple of things that I wanted to talk about. Okay, so if I'm going to try to explain to you blockchain technology, or what blockchain is and how it's relevant, I have about 7 or 8 minutes, which is really all I have. I'm going to tell you with this, which is excerpted from a 2008 article from The Economist. When the Honduran police, this is a real life example, when the Honduran police came to evict her in 2009, Mariana Catalina Izagora had lived in her lowly house for 3 decades. Unlike many of her neighbors in Tegucigalpa in Honduras, Honduras' capital, she even had an official title to the land on which it stood. But the records at the country's property institute showed another person registered as its owner too. And that person convinced a judge to sign an eviction order. By the time the legal confusion was finally sorted out, Ms. Izaguera's house had been demolished. What I want to show you is how in a blockchain world, this would not happen. How would that happen in a blockchain world? In a blockchain world, when Ms. Izaguera bought her house and had the paper deed, what would actually happen is that previously, what happens here and what happened in Honduras is a copy of the deed is kept with the homeowner and the copy of the deed is kept at City Hall, right? And of course, what happened here was that a clerk at City Hall was bribed. In a blockchain world, it's not just that. In a blockchain world, what happens is that the copy of the deed is held by the bank and it's held at the lawyers. And in fact, what actually happens is that there would be a blockchain at the bank, at the lawyer's office, at City Hall, and Ms. Izaguera's deed, sort of record of that would be also kept on each of their blockchain. And in fact, if she became a homeowner, she herself would have a blockchain as well. And as other people have homes, records of their title deeds would go on this blockchain, and all these blockchains, now Ms. Izaguera and all these other homeowners would have a copy of the blockchain where all these deeds are recorded, and all these blockchains databases would be synchronized, so they would be kept the same. Okay. Now let's say that. So what happens is that all these different parties have a common view of the database of all these deeds in Tegucigalpa. Let's say that you had a bad actor, and what the bad actor wanted is they wanted to take ownership in Ms. Mariana's house, and so the bad actor tries to forge a piece of that database, okay, and change the information. Here's the thing: previously they could do that because there's only 2 people that held the deed. Now Ms. Izaguera has that deed, and lots of other people have a record of that deed, right? And so when you compare everyone else's blockchain databases to the city halls, you find this one is different from everyone else's, and this stands out like a sore thumb, and therefore now you go, okay, this database is wrong. Okay. This encapsulates the value of blockchain. That is, previously, when you had one centralized intermediary hoard all the information and they kept all the data, then they could act unfaithfully, or they could try to rip you off. And why does a credit card company need to charge 20%? They could do a lot of things because they were a centralized intermediary. In a blockchain database, what happens is that what used to be kept solely with the centralized intermediary is available for and fully visible by a whole bunch of other people. Therefore, you ask yourself, the abuses that a central intermediary did, like what the person here at Honduras did, that's not possible in a blockchain. You know what? I hope that I'll be able to get into a little bit more of the blockchain technology, and if people have questions, I'll get into that. But I want to be sort of truthful to what I said, and I want to sort of start fielding questions here. So I'm going to stop sharing, right? And leave it to go to Julie and sort of field some additional questions.
Thank you so much, Professor Kim. I know there's a lot to say and there's probably a lot of questions, so I really appreciate you making sure we had time to get to our guests. Audience, please use that Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to enter your questions. And for those of you who are live on Facebook, you're welcome to submit your questions through the comment section there for the video. So I already have 3 questions in the chat for you, Professor Kim.
Sure.
First is Layla asks, GameStop just launched their NFT marketplace and Ethereum wallet. Would you say blockchain is becoming mainstream?
Very good question. Yes. So much more than before. But here's the thing, Layla, I think I would like to say is that, because I know, but is that it's becoming mainstream, but it's still remaining a story. Remember, I differentiate between story and value, right? So when GameStop does that, you know, they don't actually have, they've got this feature. It's sort of bare bones. It doesn't really work, and they don't actually have too many people doing that. Coinbase, for instance, which is a larger, which actually tried to do this larger wallet, a larger NFT space, no one's been buying in. And frankly, no one will actually go into GameStop either for a long time. So it's becoming more mainstream, but it's still not mainstream enough that it's actually, people will say this explicit value in that. Right now, it's mainstream enough for people to be able to create a story around that and maybe try to pump up the prices or try to get some marketing promotions, but it's not mainstream enough that it actually is really fully valuable, right? To that point, one of the things I did want to say, Layla, is I did actually speak to someone who's created a company called DLT Labs, who created a blockchain-based solutions for Walmart, right? And there, again, it's enterprise use. But one of the things, again, let's go with what I said before. One of the nice things about blockchain is it creates like a bunch of different people have a common view of the world. They keep their copies of the blockchains and they're synchronized. Right? And so for Walmart, how that came in really handy was Walmart at any point in time had about 30% of its suppliers arguing with them about whether they get paid or not. And you're a Walmart supplier, you go, I should have been paid 60 days ago. Walmart says, no, you shouldn't have. And people argue all the time. Walmart was in dispute with lots of suppliers because people didn't know what the truth was, right? If you had a blockchain and the invoice going in was recorded on the blockchain, it was faithful, it was 100% accurate. And when Walmart received it, it's 100% accurate, 100% known. Then what actually happens is there's no need for resolution and lawyers because the truth is right there, and you just write a little computer program to find out, hey, how long has it been since that invoice was put in? And it'd come back, say 45 days, and Walmart would say, we're going to pay you. That's actually saved Walmart thousands of person hours and possibly, $500,000 because now you have a blockchain that tells the world what the truth is. and tells every different supplier and all these different stakeholders what the truth is. So that's one where that's a blockchain, that's mainstream, and that has value. Where we are right now is we need to find more and more cases where we're finding value. Right now, we're still at, for a vast majority of things, and GameStop is a great example, we're still at that story level versus the value level.
Thank you. So I have a bunch of questions about how blockchain relates to financial systems and banking. So I'm going to do my best to combine these into one that is cohesive. Certainly not my area of expertise. So questions are, can blockchain make financial systems like the stock market more transparent? Will our banking industry change through the adoption of blockchain? And can we be our own bank through use of blockchain and Bitcoin?
Okay, that's a good question. So let's go through one at a time. It's easy. So let's go with the first one. What was it that you said, Julie?
It was, sorry, let me just go back to the question here. Could blockchain make financial systems like the stock market more transparent?
Yes, by nature, they're ostensibly transparent. Here's the thing, and this is a sort of story versus value. The story is that you could actually have capital markets and stock markets that are transparent, and that actually is the case. And in fact, there's something called DeFi, decentralized finance, maybe some of you may have heard of it, where you actually have an exchange that is actually completely automated. It's a program that acts as an exchange. That's a story, and there's not like this market maker. There's not someone taking a cut. It's very efficient. It works really well, and people made money. Having said that, that's the story. In truth, with Bitcoin, since I put that slide, has slided from 30,000 to 20,000. A big chunk of that is that you actually had some of these exchanges basically fall apart, or some of these mechanisms fall apart. So what happens is that, yes, you do have transparency. Yes, you do have these great transparent financial systems that actually have lower costs and cut out the middleman. But the downside is that they're immature. And the downside is that they're not really heavily regulated. And when they crash badly. So we're at the story, we're not at the full value level. So in sum, what I would say, there's a lot of promise, but not enough right now to sort of hang your hat on. Right? On the people that are doing it, but just for like regular folks, which I'm assuming most of you are sort of regular folks and that you're not doing DeFi, deep end of the pool, I'd avoid that. But promising. Second question, Julie?
So the second question was kind of two questions combined, which was about, can we use this technology to become our own bank? And how is this technology changing banking?
Okay, so that's a very good question. So if you say, how can I do this so that I can become a bank, it's that statement of itself is counter to the ethos, because the whole point of blockchain is that it's decentralized. Everyone has equal access, so there's no intermediary. If you say that, you're like, I want to be the bank, right? So then you want now. The truth of the matter is that if you want to be the bank, blockchain technologies will allow you to be the bank. It'd be like, if you want to be a bank in the absence of blockchain, you'd have to find all these regulations. If you wanted to be a bank in blockchain, you can. The problem is that a lot of people that want to be banks in blockchain, not necessarily the person who has the question, are scam artists, and so you just have to be careful. But the question is can I get together a group of people, right, and use the blockchain to create sort of peer-to-peer, transparent, a financial ecosystem that helps us all out, right? So for instance, say something like a lending pool, which is in third world countries and developed in the global south countries, they have lending pools or micro lending. Those blockchain would be an amazing way to actually execute these kinds of very noble things. Again, we're sort of at the story stage. It's the promise of that, but that's why people are getting excited, because that there is that ability to be able to do that, right? So yes, you can actually create our bank together, but if you try to create your bank, then I think you might, maybe your intentions might not be exactly sort of counter to what blockchain is trying to do. Third question?
No, that was it. Actually, I think you've covered it. Thank you. There's a couple of questions in the chat. There's a lot of questions in the chat. So audience, please bear with me. I'm trying to get to all of them. So there's some questions here that are more about sort of the logistics or of blockchain.
Mhm.
So a question about how crypto coins and Bitcoins are related to blockchain. And then some questions about mining coins. How are they mined? And a question about how this mining is not good for the environment.
Okay. All right. Usually I usually spend about 20 minutes just on that, 30
I know,
minutes on
right?
that. Right. So, okay, so blockchain is the underlying database. Let me see. I have a slide. So blockchain is the underlying database. And what actually happens in the Bitcoin network, let's use Bitcoin, is that every transaction, if I want to send something into my wallet to someone else's wallet, that transaction is recorded on the blockchain database. To what I said again, the example I showed you about Mrs. Agora, lots of people in the world keep a copy of that blockchain. So all the transactions that have ever been recorded on Bitcoin network, thousands of people actually have access to that database. Okay, so every transaction on that. So that is how so that the database is the database technology is blockchain technology, and that's critical to running the Bitcoin network. The Bitcoin network is ostensibly meant to be able to make payments. So rather than right now, if I want to make a payment to you, Julie, that's got to go through a financial institution. I make an Interact payment through my bank. I do a credit card payment. Bitcoin is the idea that I can make a payment directly to your wallet, Julie, without there being an intermediary. And everything that's involved in doing that is handled by the Bitcoin network and is handled by the technology, right? And if you think about that, there's no transaction fee to be taken off of there. This is amazing. If you want to send money, one of the first business models, if I'm making money here and I would send money back to the Philippines, right? Sometimes I had to pay 10%, 20% fees for doing that. Using Bitcoin, it was like next to nothing, right? If you want to make, and with the Ukraine, it was a really efficient way to give donations, make payments for donations to Ukraine, because a lot of the financial institutions were sort of stuck in that area. So ostensibly, the story is that it makes for a great payment system. Okay, so now let me go back to your second part question, because a lot of people have questions about mining. So let me sort of walk this through with you folks. Again, I'm trying to compress what I normally do in about 30 minutes in about 5. So let's say that I want to create this decentralized payment system. Okay. One of the great things about Bitcoin is that all the transactions are visible, but the identities of people transacting, you don't know. So it's like a wallet with this ID and another wallet with ID. You can see money being sent from one wallet to the other, but you have no idea who the person is, which is why one of the heavy uses of blockchain is for things like, money laundering, or for things like buying illicit goods. So I think some people probably know that already. So the thing is that, even though, let me sort of say this generically, at the end of the day, there's something called double spending. Let's say that I send Julie money and I send Rose money at almost the exact same time. Okay. And what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to rip you off. I'm trying to, I have one Bitcoin and I bought something from Julie, I bought something from Rose, and I'm going to, for one Bitcoin each, I'm going to send one Bitcoin to Julie, one Bitcoin to Rose, yet I only have one. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to scam the system, right? And if I do that really close in time enough, what could happen is that there could be some ambiguity. Like somebody might say, you know what, Rose received the money, not Julie, right? And Julie might say, I received the money, not Rose. So you need someone, at the end of the day, it might be really difficult like Julie and Rose will argue, so I received the money because they want the money. So you need some, you do need, even though it's a decentralized system, even though it ostensibly has no intermediary, you do need sometimes when someone has to step and say, yes, Rose received the money. What I said is the final answer. Like Rose received it, Julie did not, and everyone has to abide by that. Okay. So what the Bitcoin network realizes that in order for the network to work well, we do sometimes need like a final authority. Okay? And that's what a miner is. So what happens in Bitcoin network, roughly every 10 minutes, a miner is chosen to say they're going to go and verify all the transactions, and they're going to be the final authority. for all the transactions that occurred in about the last 10 minutes, and everyone's blockchain. And so they said, this is the block. This is what's called blockchain. So all these transactions could get put into a block, and this block, everyone else has to add on to their blockchain. So what I said goes, okay? Next 10 minutes, some other miner is chosen, and whatever their miner says are all the transactions that occurred, everyone has to abide by that. So the idea then is that these miners provide this valuable verification that they become final authorities. But the big thing is that it's not always the same miner doing it all the time. Otherwise, that would be centralized. Okay, so miners serve an important function. They're very useful. The thing, though, is that if you think about it, well, if the miners are crooked, they can screw up the whole system. So you need to be able to choose a miner that isn't crooked, right? And so how do you choose? So what you need to do is you need to incentivize a miner. Say, hey, you're doing some work. It's very valuable work. We can't just do it on volunteer work. So we're going to give you Bitcoins. So what the system is going to do is we're going to mint Bitcoins and we're going to give it to you, miner, and for doing this verification very faithfully. Okay, that sounds great. So that's why you will become a miner, because right now you receive about 6.25 Bitcoin. So even now it's still about $150,000 US for doing this every 10 minutes. So every 10 minutes, 6.25 Bitcoins are introduced in the world and miners get that. Okay, so, and let me answer the last question, which has to do with electricity. Why is electricity involved in this, right? Which I think is what people, so I think if you're convinced with me that miners are really important and miners can't be corruptible. So here's the thing. Receiving $150,000 is good, but if you really wanted to screw up the system, if you wanted to make billions of dollars, you could be a miner and screw up the whole system and skim the money. Okay, so you can, if you have a really crooked miner, they can do massive damage. And so the idea is, hey, let's pick miners who are very happy to receive $150,000 every 10 minutes or so. Again, lots of miners in the world, but that aren't so crooked that they want to crash the whole system and make billions of dollars. Okay, so if you want to get somebody who's happy to earn a certain wage, but who isn't out there trying to be really, really crooked and really screw up the whole system, what do? You pick rich, relatively rich people. Let me give an example. So in North American sports, right, gamblers, bribing athletes is unheard of, because in North American sports, athletes make a lot of money, like millions of dollars. Therefore, a gambler offers you a certain amount of money. It's not worth it to ruin your career. So North American sports, because athletes are rich, they're hard to bribe. In places, in other parts of the world, gamblers like athletes cheat all the time. They have to get bribed all the time because they don't make very much money. So the gamblers bribe them. So the idea is that you can't be bribed. You can't, if you're already rich and you're making a good living, then you can't be bribed. If you're a miner that's already rich and you're happy, then you're happy with $150,000, but you're not going to be bribed. You're not going to do something to bring the system down, right? So the idea for the Bitcoin network is let's pick rich miners, right? That makes sense. How is a miner rich? A miner is rich if they're rich in what is valuable to an electronic network, which is electricity and CPU power. So why don't we pick miners that have access to a lot of CPU power? Because if they have a lot of access to CPU power, they're electronically rich. And if they're electronically rich, they're not going to try to, they're not going to be bribed or bring the system down corruptly. Right? The problem with mining is that in order to identify people that are electronically rich, they have to show you they have access to a lot of electricity. And so all these miners are trying to, in order to be able to win their 6.25 Bitcoins, are consuming a lot of electricity to demonstrate that they're rich in electricity. So what happens, but only one miner wins every 10 minutes. So what happens right now is that all the mining is, using electricity power, I think, of Ireland. I think might even be a larger country right now for this reason. But the flip side of it is that it's this thing is called proof of work. You might have heard that somewhere. But this way of using, demonstrating that you're a credible miner by demonstrating that you could solve this puzzle that only requires a lot of electricity is actually a very elegant way of actually ensuring consensus, making sure that no one cheats the Bitcoin network. The problem is that it's time consuming, but more importantly, the problem is that it consumes a lot of electricity really for like a lot of electricity for naught.
That is so fascinating. And I know I can say I still have a lot to learn about crypto, and thank you for bringing your expertise. I'm afraid we don't have time for any more questions. I'm so sorry to those of you who asked really wonderful questions in the background that we didn't get to. Professor Kim, if there's resources that you can share with the audience, we'd be happy to send it out afterwards on your behalf. And that could be anything from, YouTube videos or articles that kind of help break down some of the complexity that you've, really just started to address in the short period of time we had today.
Sure, Julie. Actually, there are 2 podcasts I recommend now.
Amazing.
Actually, 3. There's 3. But one of the interesting ones is Freakonomics podcast. They do a 3-part series. I think it's the best, actually.
It's really good.
One of the things that these people have way more resources than I do, so they're much better explaining stuff than I have.
That's awesome. Thank you. If there's others that you think of, just email it to one of us on staff, and we'll get it sent out.
What I was going to say is that if people do have questions, do we have to end? Because I don't mind staying the next while if people have questions, or does it just pretty much have to end?
I think we do need to close, okay. I'm afraid, but thank you for offering your time. I really appreciate it.
Okay.
So I'll just wrap up now, and thank you again, Professor Kim, for all the expertise and time that you've spent with us today.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you. Okay.
It's a pleasure.
Bye-bye.
All right. For those of you who'd like to share today's session with family and friends, it'll be posted on our YouTube page. You can search for us there, YorkU Alumni, and you can watch past lectures there that you may have missed. We have one more poll question for you before you go, and that is, how would you rate your knowledge of today's topic following this discussion? So you can go ahead and answer that now. And this closes our Scholars Hub events for the summer, and we will return back in September. You can register to learn more about upcoming sessions at yorku.ca/alumni and friends. Enjoy the rest of your summer, and thank you all.